Our next panel is on education, and the moderator for our panel is Fernando Reimers. Fernando is, I'm going to make sure I get this right, the Ford Foundation Professor of International Education and the Director of the International Education Policy Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So we'll invite Fernando and the panelists to come up, and Fernando will introduce the other panelists and keep everyone in place.
Good morning, and welcome to this conversation on the power of education to achieve gender equity. The idea that education and gender equity are intertwined is as old as the idea of public education itself. In this country, people like the Peabody sisters or Jane Addams were at the same time great advocates for the political and civil rights of women, of public education, and of peace. So, what we're going to talk about today is education, the great equalizer. And what is equality of educational opportunity equal to empowerment of women in the society? And I think at the core of the presentations are going to be two ideas. One idea is, to what extent do schools as social institutions have sufficient autonomy from the larger society, social institutions and cultural norms to really anticipate a society that is different than the society in which they operate. And the second idea we're going to discuss is the concept of educational opportunity as a moving bar. Many lay people, when they think about educational opportunity and gender equity, tend to think about access, getting kids to school and getting them to finish a course of education. But of course, we know that this is just the beginning of educational opportunity. It's about what happens in those schools. It's about what children learn. It's about the choices that they make when they go on to colleges in terms of different majors. It's about the kind of climate that exists in the school. Many of us tend to think of schools as universally benign environments, but I would argue that some schools are actually toxic environments for the development of gender equitable notions. So we have an extraordinary panel today to speak to these issues. We're going to hear first from Dr. Thuwayba Barwani, who's the Dean of the College of Education of Sultan Qaboos University in Oman, and who has been not only leading the preparation of the next generation of education leaders in Oman, but who has been a member of the cabinet and of the council, of the State Council of Higher Education. And she's going to talk about these issues that I have just highlighted from the point of view of developments in the Omani context. Next, we're going to hear from Cecilia María Vélez, who is a Robert Kennedy visiting professor here at Harvard at the School of Education. We're delighted to have her as a colleague for the year, but who has been one of the best education secretaries that I have met in my career. She was Secretary of Education in Colombia for 8 years, and previous to that, she was Secretary of Education in Bogota, where she advanced a series of reforms designed to achieve gender equity, particularly reforms to make civic education, citizenship education, at the core of which are concepts of gender equity, a real priority, and programs of sex education, which she's going to talk about today. And lastly, we're going to hear from Jishnu, who is a graduate of our own university and a senior economy in the Development Research Group at the World Bank, where he has the impossible task, and he's to be commended for accepting it, to try to put these issues in a global context. And the reason why it is a very difficult task is because, as we're going to hear from our first two speakers, the answer to these two questions of the autonomy of schools from the larger cultural context and the capacity of schools to expand opportunity as a moving bar is very much contextually situated in time and place in a culture. So each of them is going to speak for about 15 minutes, I hope, and then we're going to have a little dialogue among themselves, and then we hope to take your questions and engage them. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Barwani.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real great pleasure for me to be here today to share with you the story of my country, Oman, that has journeyed for 40 years from stagnation, economic underdevelopment, poverty, illiteracy, and all the other ills of society that you can think of from 1970 to the present. I'll take you on this journey. And I'm going to talk about a success story, actually. I've heard a lot of things that are not happening in countries over the globe from yesterday and today. Today, I'm going to tell you about what is actually happening and how much we've been able to accomplish in terms of education and education of women, particularly as a result of the focus that my country has had on education and focusing on the woman and believing that the woman is the one who carries bigger responsibility of development. I didn't know that Oman was going to be in the news recently when I prepared this PowerPoint, so I figured people would ask me, where is Oman? And I have this, but I guess now you have heard about Oman and what's happening there, so you don't need this anymore. So in this presentation, I'm going to look at the Renaissance, which started in 1970, that's how we call it. And before that, as you can see on the picture on your left, is in 1970 when His Majesty, the Sultan of Oman, took over from his father and led the country to where we are today now. Now, when it started, the country, as I said, did not have any basic infrastructure, no paved roads, no schools. Actually, we started with 3 schools in 1970, 3 schools that had only boys enrolled in it, in the whole country. No schools for girls. What girls learned, when they did learn, was from Quranic schools, which are mostly done at home and for a certain period only, until puberty. Girls were not even allowed to go to Quranic schools. So what was the situation of women at that time? I think it's very important for you to see where we're coming from so that you can appreciate where we are today. So I'll spend a little time to talk on that. The woman has been very well described by Sir Wendell Phillips in his book, The Unknown Oman. And he talks about the Omani women as being the silent ones. He says in terms of personality, of economics, of politics and civics, there are no women in Oman. Women exist in numbers, always greater than men, but their existence is domestic. Now that's really very true, and that was in 1958, but in 1970 the situation was still the same. Now here's how I would describe the Omani woman, the characteristics of the Omani woman before 1970. Illiterate, ignorant, totally dependent on the man, either a brother or husband or father, married very, very young, immediately after puberty, has many children, average of 8 to 10, and could go up to 15 and 16 and 17 with some women. Life expectancy was 48, high maternal mortality, economic contribution was only limited to agriculture and animal husbandry. So that was a woman in 1970. Then the journey begins, the journey that we are all so proud of, that has gotten us up to here, to this level, where we can fully participate in the development of our society. In 1970, women had no education, no political or economic power. Their role was domestic. Many families had to leave the country and find better life abroad, especially education for their children. So many of our families had left Oman in the early years before 1970, either to go to the surrounding Gulf countries where education was provided, or go to our dominions, where Oman had dominions in Africa, East Africa, and had dominions in Pakistan, in Gwadar. And they moved to those dominions or exiled to any other country that would accept them. So the Omani women shared a number of characteristics. And when they came back, they brought with them lots of different cultures, backgrounds, languages, And all of this, I think, has contributed immensely to the development of the Omani woman. Now, what makes Omani women different? I think this is one of the aspects that made Omani women different. The fact that the parents and grandparents lived abroad and interacted with different cultures and brought back different languages, tolerance, patience, willingness to accept different people, ready to embark on development without questioning as to whether it was right or wrong. They knew it was right because they've seen it happen somewhere else. The political will was, I think, to me, the major element, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail. But His Majesty himself has been the driving force, and from 1970 when he took over, his emphasis has been on the education of girls and boys, equity in the provision of education and all other services for girls and boys. And so, and calling on to Omani women to shoulder responsibility, to be companions to men in the development of our society. Now, this one is in 1977, 7 years after he took over. He's continuing with the same emphasis, the same story. And here, he's calling on something which is very important, a balance between modernity and tradition, that we should look for standards, improvement of our well-being, but at the same time not to forget that we are Muslims and we are Arabs and we have a culture and we have traditions and we have obligations to our religion. Now, as I said earlier, Oman's dominions in East Africa and Gwadar and the trading activities on the Indian Ocean, the Silk Route, and some of those who exiled and emigrated to other countries have brought into Oman a multicultural and multilingual society. Right now in Muscat, you can hear so many languages spoken. And I think most of the people who come to Oman find it comforting that they can fit in easily because of the willingness of the Omani people and hospitality of the Omani people to accept strangers and foreigners in their midst. Positive legislation is another element. I think His Majesty did not only speak on empowering women and giving them equal opportunities, but he also enacted laws that made it possible for women to exercise these rights. So we have, of course, the Islamic Sharia is the basis of all our laws, but we also have the basic law of the state that was introduced in 1996, and we have the personal status law that was introduced in 1997. And this one dealt with maintenance, right to divorce, right to manage personal property, equitable treatment of spouses if you have more than one, and also visitation, which some women used to experience difficulty going to visit their parents if they lived far, and now it is considered to be their right and they could do it. Enabling and supportive environment, this is where the society, as I said earlier, because it is much more open and willing to accept the position of a woman and encourage her actually to participate, gave the woman a right to an education, had no problem giving her freedom of choice. As you can see, if you walk in the streets of Oman, some women are covered like me, some women are covered completely with only their eyes open, as can be seen, and some women are not even covered. So that's fine. It's a choice. And we know that religion wants us to be modest, but the government does not enforce. It leaves the choice to the woman herself to decide how she wants to present herself. Now, in 2009, things had developed. A lot of changes had occurred. Oman was making a lot of progress. And more, His Majesty is talking about the role of the woman and the fact that she has to participate a lot more in developing of the society, and actually talks about the Omani woman and her participation as the bird with two wings, and that one wing of a bird cannot fly, and so the bird needs both wings to make her fly. Now, there's some socioeconomic indicators that have shown that education has actually taken Oman a long way. So it puts a very good case for education. Here I have some statistics that I'll go through quickly, just so you have some evidence of what I'm talking about. I'll show you here education access of women, and it's almost the same as that of men if you look at 2009, 2010, but you can see in tertiary education, females surpass males in terms of numbers, basically because they outperform. And higher education in Oman is based on merit. So if you don't do well in higher certificate of secondary school certificate, you don't get into a higher education institution. And that's the main reason. Now, I show you also another table that shows enrollment in higher education. That one shows you the distribution in different institutions of higher education in Oman. Sultan Qaboos University is where I work, and that's the only public institution in Oman, and we have 50% females. The reason why we have 50% is because the university had to make a special policy to admit boys at a lower level than girls. If they didn't do that, we would have an overwhelming number of girls admitted out of merit in Oman. Now, let's look closely at performance. Here you can see the progression, and SQU is an example for you. Students who are in the distinction lists, as you can see, the reds are females, and they're way up there. And the boys are down there. And if you look at the second graph, it shows probation, and you can see the boys are way up there, and the girls are down there. Now, let's look at graduation, and tells you the same story. Graduation, girls graduate faster, and more girls graduate, and boys lag behind because they take longer to complete their studies. Now, this is an issue that I think is currently challenging us. And we are a paternalistic society, and we need a balance in our society. And I have just been given a grant, just 2 weeks ago it was announced, to look into the underperformance of boys and what kinds of interventions are required. It's so critical that we get the boys on board and have them succeed like we are. We need the men to be next to us, to support us, and to make us able to do what we need to do. We can't lose men between the cracks. So I'm working on that research myself, and hopefully next time around I can share that kind of research with you. Social indicators are very positive. As you can see, marriage age has gone down to 25 and above in the last number of years, 40 years. Marrying into a polygamous union has also gone down for educated ladies. Fewer divorces for educated ladies. This is a study done by UNICEF, by the way. Childbearing age stops at 35 with educated ladies, and child mortality, of course, has gone down dramatically as a result of education. They know what to do and where to go and how to save their kids. Health indicators are equally good. As you can see, these are the present ones, but if you look at fertility, it used to be 8 point something in the 70s, and now we are 3.3. Life expectancy was 48, as I said to you earlier, and now it's 75.7, and all the other indicators are actually really, really good. Participation indicators, though, are not as good. Only 18% of the workforce is women. Now we wonder where those educated girls who are doing so well in school and so well in college, where do they go and what do they do? However, in the workforce, women are far better educated than males. So they get better salaries and they get promotions much faster than their male counterparts. Down there, you can see the majority of females still, like in any other country or many countries in the world, concentrate in the health sector, education sector, and the social sciences related sectors. I have tables there to show you, but I think I will run out of time. Political indicators. We have women who run and vote for Shura elections. Shura is the lower house. We have 2 women who have been voted in office in the Shura election several years ago for 2 terms, and one had 1 term. Last Shura elections, we didn't get any women in office. There's an upcoming election, and we are really working so hard to prepare ladies, and I think we have some powerful women who will make it this time. We have 16 women, including myself, appointed to Majesty, which is the Senate or the upper chamber, and 4 cabinet ministers, 6 women ambassadors who are in the most powerful capitals, DC, New York, in the UN, Germany. They chose women to put them there, not men. I'm really proud of them. But we have challenges. Among the challenges that are facing Omani women is lack of awareness and understanding of our rights, what they are in Islam and what they are in the civil laws, and how to ask for these rights. High illiteracy rates still continues with elderly, 40 and above. We still have many women who are illiterate. But when you look at participation rates in literacy classes, you find there are more women who are trying to eradicate their illiteracy than there are men. Then you have low economic participation that I've shown you earlier, so I don't need to go on that table, otherwise I'll waste too much time. Few monitoring mechanisms. We have the laws, we have political will, but there are no instituted mechanisms to monitor the implementation of either the political will of the government or His Majesty himself or the laws that have been enacted. Insufficient social support. Here I'm talking about women who are working, and we don't have play schools and things like that that are supportive in the workplace of women, even though we have access to domestic help at home, live-in domestic help, and we have the extended family that is very supportive too. You'll see in my next slides. Still, there are many women who move away from their regions and they work in Muscat, for instance, and they can't find the support they need to continue working in peace. So here I want to give you a little bit, share with you some results that I had on a study that I conducted a few years ago. I wanted to know, what did Omani women really think about various aspects of the life they live in? Things that most of the times we've been stereotyped as Muslim Arab women. Issues that I wanted to look at is like role in the family. Is it the man who is always in control, even after you are educated, highly educated? And I looked at women who had masters or PhDs and who had been educated abroad in the Western world. And here's what I found, actually surprisingly. They still thought that father has to be the dominant one in the family. They didn't want to compete with a man because they thought their roles were different. And that if the woman insists on controlling the household, she loses. She doesn't gain because the man just walks away and leaves every responsibility on her shoulders. He gets the fun and she gets to do the work. Personal rights and discrimination also, they think that they are not discriminated in any way. The government has given them all the rights, but they have to choose which rights they want to exercise. On divorce, they think that it's best that Islam left the word on divorce on the man because women are not strong enough emotionally. They will jump to divorce on the smallest of things. That's what they thought. And they also say that divorce is increasing with the younger generation because they have no tolerance for men anymore, because they are also breadwinners and they're contributing to the economy of the family. On freedom, they think that they are free and they can express their opinions. And what is important is that they do not abuse the freedom given to them. They should know their limits. Interestingly, the extended family also, they said that they would like to have the extended family near them, especially in the early years of marriage, because they help resolve problems. And also, when they work, it's important that there is somebody, an elderly person they can trust to take care of the kids while they're away. On polygamy, they say Islam has allowed it, so we can't stop it, but we have a choice of whether we accept to live in such an arrangement. And I thought that this was really, really, it made my day when a lady said that. And I thought we have reached a point where we could think of what is right and what is not right, and which direction we really want to go. Unless a husband can balance, he has no right to take a second wife. And that's true, but they never balance. So, hijab, the head cover, it is a personal choice. As I said earlier, in the streets of Oman, you can find varieties and degrees of covering. And so I decided to do it because I believe that a good Muslim has to cover properly. Hijab is not oppressive, it is liberating. And we all, okay, sure, I'm done. Hijab does not prohibit me from doing anything that I want to do. So you can be covered, and you can see some pictures I got for you at the end, covered, and she runs a company, a cab, and she drives a cab with her cover and her abaya. Now, so what am I saying? What I'm saying is that it seems clear that through education, women in Oman have come to recognize that they must go at their own pace, on their own terms, and within the realities of their own religion and culture. They also know that the empowerment lies in their ability to use their wisdom to maintain the delicate balance, and this balance is very critical, delicate balance that would establish, restore, and nurture the dignity of their womanhood. I think, basically, the message that I want you to take away is that there is no one definition of empowerment and no one definition of development. It has to be defined by the women themselves in their own contexts. Thank you.
Cecilia, you're next. Thank you very much. We're going to hear the three presentations and then have a little bit of exchange among the panel members. Thank you.
Good morning. Is it a little difficult to speak after this extraordinary presentation? But let's go. I'm going to speak about women in the educational system in Colombia, specifically. I'm going to speak about a work that we almost done, I think that is done, in literacy and in enrollment, a work to be done in quality and in salaries equity. And I'm going to speak about some cultural challenges and the way we are facing them. The work almost done. Here we have enrollment by gender in public schools. I didn't put the total, and I was going to correct it, but I didn't want to bother the technical assistant with all this. But it's almost the same. We have more boys in elementary than in secondary. In secondary, we have more women, and in high school, we have more women. But the point is that in the census, it says that there are more men in Colombia, that the enrollment is higher for the women, and especially in secondary. They are, the dropout is lower for women than they complete the studies or they get the degree in major proportion. Then here is the enrollment in higher education that, as was said, is almost over all the world. We have more women than boys. And illiteracy. In the total, there are almost the same. In urban areas, we have less the women. Wait, in urban they do better, and in rural areas they do worse. But I think, well, yes, they have less illiteracy in urban areas. I think that I have the colors, the contrary in the colors. They are more literate. They have the rate is lower for women's in the urban area, and in the total is almost the same. In rural areas, we have a problem. We have still a problem with women's. Here I'm going to work about the work to be done and quality. Unless language and philosophy, in all the other areas, women are doing, boys are outperforming women. And there is a problem because 10 years ago, the difference in literacy was higher. Women were outperforming boys in much more percentage. Now, all the country is improving in reading and writing, and boys are doing better. But it's not the case in math, it's not the case in science. The difference in science and math and the other subjects is continue to be against women. And I think that we have to do something about that, because what we have realized is that it has to be with the expectative that teacher has with the women. They don't think they can do well, they can perform well in math or in science. Then we have to do an effort in this enhancing competences in basic, at the basic areas. And here we have the salary for the newly graduates by gender. And we see that in salaries also we have like the women are performing lower. What we have seen is that it's not that it is the same, in the same position they have different salaries. The point is that the women's choice is for in areas where we don't have high salaries. I think, I don't know if it's with my will that women are more free to choose what they want to select, because they are not so pressed to have high salaries. And that's why it's happening. But then we have a problem there, and we have to work on it without losing that possibility that I want it all. Boys and girls can choose whatever they want and have salaries, the salaries enough. But I don't know how to do that, because obviously there are some areas where you get more salaries. But the difference is diminishing. Now it's like a tendency that that difference between the salaries of men and women are diminishing. Okay, and then here I'm going to speak about these cultural challenges, because for us in Colombia are very important. We have a conflict. We have all this problem, the violent problem within the country, and some of the things that we see in gender behavior is the same problem that we see in the society. But here specifically for students, for adolescents, we have the teenage pregnancy. That is a phenomenon that is growing. But it is growing especially, for example, in displaced girls. The displaced girls by the conflict get pregnant very easily. We have familiar violence within the family. It fosters violence in society. Violence in society fosters violence within the family. but it's a problem because it's a high violence against women. And when you ask how they think about violence against the woman, they say it could be if it's to save the man's honor. Then if we ask in the other way, they are not going to say that the violence against men is going to be okay when it's to save the honor of the men. And that's the problem that we have. It's a general problem. It's 47% of them that when we did a survey that they answered that. And there is also a difference in the treating of toward women in decision making. Families think women are very sentimental, have a lot of sentiments. They are not good doing good decisions. You have to keep them to make decisions. Then what we find out was that we have to foster citizenship competences, obviously to sustain or to have the possibility of the peace and sustainable peace processes. And we have to enhance citizenship competences. But that sexual education, that is a big program that we have to be with that. Good relationship between genders can improve relationship in overall the society. It can help to have peace and to have a sustainable peace processes. And then the sexual education program, that is a program by law, we decided to focus it in enhancing citizenship competences. Then it's a transversal subject. It's not like to giving information to the kids, biological information and things like that, but that we have done in the past. It's more that changing the attitudes. Then it is not in a special class, it is not a course, it is a transversal subject. It is adapted to regional and cultural characteristics. As the preceding conferences said, you have to look at how are the specific cultural behaviors. We have very different regions within Colombia. And for example, we have the very liberal ones, and we have very conservative ones related with the relationship between genders. Then you have to adapt the program, and you have to discuss, putting in context the project. It's focused in competences, not in content. And then the kind of competence that we want to enhance is how to identify and accept difference. To do that, you have to accept yourself, and you have to identify who are you, and then to identify others and to identify the difference and accept those differences. That is very important in our case, because violence is fostered because you cannot accept that the other is different. And how communicate feelings. That is a big problem, and we think that we have to encourage. But we have to encourage not only girls, we have to encourage boys, in this case, to communicate feelings. Because if you don't communicate it, probably you are going to go to do or to act in ways, for example, in more violent ways. If you communicate feelings, you can solve problems more easily. How to solve problems in a pacific way is another competence that we try to foster. But you see, it's a general way of looking citizenship, but it has to be also with relationship within between the sex or between the genders. And finally, the project integrates the community. It's not only the public and civil organization at the region that that have to deal with this kind of subjects go together, and, for example, for the definition of what are the characteristics in certain regions, they put together what they know, and they describe, and they work together. And this organization helps schools to develop the program, and the parents also are involved. But it's very important because one of the principal things that we do with this project is to define the time and the space where these subjects are going to be discussed by the students with the teachers. And the program doesn't only help the students, they have helped a lot the teachers, because sometimes teachers doesn't know how to speak about this subject, and it has been really very interesting, and the feedback about the program is really extraordinary. And I think that with this program we are facing these cultural challenges, and well, this was all what I wanted to transmit to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and learn from all the presentations before. It's also intimidating. We just heard two brilliant presentations, and I think the morning session was great. I'm at the World Bank, and part of the reason I'm here is because the World Bank puts out a flagship publication every year that's called the World Development Report. And it's about a topic of major interest in every year. And this year, in September, it's going to be on gender and development. So I am part of the group that's working on that topic, and I wanted to share some of the things that we're finding on education around the world. We have a difficult mandate because, in some sense, one of the things that we have to say as a global institution is, where do we think things are going? Where do we think we have come from? And I think that came across very nicely in the presentation on Oman. And really think hard about the fact that many countries today are growing. People are becoming less poor, perhaps not as fast as we want and not as well as we want. And with this kind of growth, with these increases in income, come a bunch of things. Right? It's more cash in people's hands, but it's also, in a lot of cases, better means of delivering services, better ways to access urban areas, more electrification. And one of the things that we have tried to do is to say, well, which are the problems that we feel are going to respond to income growth over the next 10 to 20 years, and where do we think things are really sticky? Where do we think that things are not improving as countries grow faster? Right? So what I'm going to try and highlight in today's talk is, if you look over the last 30 to 40 years, there's actually been very impressive progress in educational attainment. Right? One of the things we do is troll through enormous quantities of data. So I am going to put up some graphs which are going to be impossible to read. So I'll take you through what they actually say. But gaps in educational attainment have virtually closed. And I think we heard this from both presentations before, that it's now in many countries, it's the boys who are starting to face a disadvantage. Right? And coming to Iris's point about which is some large portion of the wage gaps today between men and women are because they're in different occupations. Right? And I'm going to show you, and I'm going to try and show you that perhaps the reason why this is happening is because, unlike educational attainment, we really need many barriers to lift at the same time. Right? And that's been hard to do. Okay? So here's the good news. Gaps are closing, and in some cases, even reversing. So here's my first of many graphs. This one just tells us the 100 is a line where there's gender parity, and the red dots are one on every country. The red dots are for primary education, and the blue dots for secondary education. So what you see for primary education is there's some countries where girls are less enrolled than boys, but on average, everybody's pretty much, girls and boys are equally enrolled. In fact, of all out-of-school children at the primary level, 53% are girls, 47% are boys. So very, 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 very close. On secondary education, there are a bunch of countries where, again, girls are more out of school than boys, but there are also a large number of countries, which you see on the right-hand side, where there are far more boys out of school than girls. Right? In fact, if you think about tertiary education, there's been a 7-fold increase in female tertiary education since 1970, and a 4-fold increase increase for men. Right? There's another way to see this kind of shifting gaps from primary to secondary, and this just plots a line where we have on the horizontal axis males, and on the vertical axis females, and that diagonal line going down the center is equality. Right? So any country that's above the diagonal line is where there are more women in education than men. Right? So on the left, with primary education, we are pretty much close to universal primary education. There's still some countries that are not yet up there. And there's some countries where clearly girls are more out of school than boys. Secondary education, it's kind of all along the gender parity lines. And by the time we get into tertiary education, there are a large number of countries where there are more women in college than men. Right? So this is a pattern that we universally are finding from a large number of data sets, that on primary education, we are closing the gaps. On secondary, there are problems in some countries towards male disadvantage, particularly, for example, the Caribbean countries. And there are other countries where there is female disadvantage, but by the time we're getting into tertiary, it really looks like male disadvantage is where the problems are starting to rise. It's a similar story for learning. So I want you to keep one number in mind. That number is about 125. That number is important to keep in mind because it's the gap between where poor countries are on tests and learning and where the rich countries are. Relative to those gaps, the gaps that we find between boys and girls are pretty small, right? So we do find in some countries, and this is something that's been remarked about a lot, that boys are somewhat better at mathematics and girls are somewhat better at learning. But to keep that in perspective, those gaps are a very small fraction of the huge differences in learning between, say, a country like India and the US, right? So that's the big caveat, is learning levels are very poor. We are not being able to make progress on that, but it affects girls and boys equally. Right? So one of the things that we tried to do was to say, well, we are interested in some deep fashion in inequality. Right? And inequality can arise from a large number of reasons. Right? So let's think about two. People may be out of school because they're poor. They might also be out of school because they're girls. Right? And as a policy-making institution, one of our responsibilities is to say, how important is it to focus, how much should we be dedicating to poverty? How much should we be dedicating to gender? How much should we be dedicating to specific ethnic groups? So one of the exercises we tried to do was to say, let me try and see how much total inequality there is in the system in educational attainment, and then let's try and see how much inequality remains if we make enrollment equals for boys and girls. Right? The remaining inequality is going to come from poverty. It's going to come from the fact that you're in a deep, rural, inaccessible area. And we did this for a large number of countries. Right? So the blue lines, as I promised, this is impossible to see. The blue bars are the total inequality in the educational system. The red bars were what we came up with once we equalized enrollments between girls and boys, and the basic pattern remains the same. At primary education, we found that in the worst countries, gender inequality accounted for about 2% of total inequality, at most. In secondary education, it got slightly worse, right? 15% up to about 15% in some countries. But it's really what remains salient at the primary level, and I think to a large extent at the secondary level, is poverty. We just find enormous differences in enrollments, say, in some sub-Saharan African countries between being the poorest and being wealthier. In fact, in almost all countries today, it's better to be a girl in the second quintile, which is the second 20%, than a boy in the first. And here's our model or framework for thinking about this. And the way we've been thinking about this framework is to really say what's going on arises from an interaction between households, markets, and institutions, where institutions can be formal institutions or informal institutions. Right? And with educational attainment, we think what's happened is that lifting barriers on any one of these, whether it's markets, whether it's households, or whether it's institutions, has worked. Right? Let me return to Rob's talk in the morning. So Rob's talk in the morning really said, look, when people realized that there were higher returns to girls, they sent more of them to school. What did Rob not do? Rob did not improve the schools. He did not construct more schools. And he didn't give households more money. Right? So that's the notion that a change in the market affected the girls without changing anything else. Right? Think about institutions. In Africa, we're finding that as primary school fees have dropped, many girls have come into school. In Pakistan, we find that when you construct a school, more girls come into school. Right? These did not change returns, and I think the Omani case was a great case of this, where there are still problems with the labor market, but a push from the supply side actually changed the way girls are in school. Right? Similarly, in households, one of the things we're finding is that when you give money to households, they send their girls to school more. And we think that's really what's worked. We could work either in households or in markets or in institutions, not care about the others, and it's got the girls in. Right? Where we think there are really shocking problems is in educational segregation. Right? So this is yet another unreadable table, where we looked at as many countries as we could find, and I'll summarize it for you. And so it ranges from about 90 to 100 countries, and we looked at which fields were male-dominated and female-dominated. So the first row is agriculture. In 66 countries, so that's 75%, it's male-dominated. In 3, it's female-dominated, and in 20, it's neutral. In education, in 81 countries, so that's 84%, it is a female-dominated field. It's male-dominated in 6% of the countries, and it's neutral in 10. I'll just read you one more. Engineering, all 97 countries we looked at were male-dominated. Right? Given the enormous progress we've made in attainment, for me and for the team, this has been an absolutely shocking revelation that there's been so little change in this. And let me just show you what that translates into. So we looked at occupational segregation in 3 countries, and this is the graph on the left, Bangladesh, Finland, and Mexico. It's the same, right? The occupations that women are in Bangladesh are virtually the same as the occupations they're in Mexico, and they're virtually the same as the occupations they are in Finland. This is key because we're finding that the occupations that women go into actually drive a fairly significant fraction of the wage gap that you see. And just on the right, the reminder is there are significant wage gaps in all countries around the world. Right? What do we think is going on, and why has this been harder to solve? And this is kind of the last couple of slides. We think what's going on is you really need to lift many barriers at the same time. Right? And I think the work that's coming out, especially from the US and other countries, is that in making career choices, women really bear and still bear the lion's share of responsibility at home. Right? So the work from the US, for example, shows they have even MBA graduates from top universities face very interrupted careers, right? And they have to factor in how all of this is going to work down the line. Right? There's a need for flexibility, there's an unequal burden of work at home, and there are severely interrupted careers that start affecting the career trajectory. Right? At the same time, what we find is there's a dramatic reluctance on the side of firms and markets to experiment with new forms of work. This is the idea that bad norms can set in. And unless people are willing to collectively experiment or push together, it's been very hard for firms to say, we will try this out and try out this new mode of production to get women in. So our sense is that where multiple constraints need to be released at the same time, and this field of study in occupational segregation is one of them, there has been much less progress. Right? Let me just give you one idea of what I'm talking about. Here's my last graph. We plotted, this is on the horizontal axis as the fraction of income a woman gets into the house. Right? The one on the right is when she brings home 100% of the income. Right? On the vertical axis is the fraction of work that she does at home, right, compared to the husband. So for example, in Guatemala, irrespective of how much money she's bringing in home, she's doing 90% of the housework and 90% of the child maintenance. Right? When you get into Mexico, it starts dropping, but if she brings home about 50% of the income, it's still the case she's doing about 75% of the work. Right? Our last country was France, and we do this for about 28 countries where we have data. France is a country where there's been enormous public support for childcare at early ages, some institutional support for women in work. Even there, it's only when she brings in all the income into her house that the burden at home is equally shared between the husband and the wife. Right? So our sense here is that, look, we really think that in this sphere, that educational choices are not just a problem of the education sector, but of the system as a whole. And that's where it's been difficult to change, right? So let me just conclude by saying, I think overall things are looking much better than they did 20 years ago. And at least on attainments, we would expect things to start, looking pretty decent as countries grow richer. And where these improvements have come, lifting any one of several barriers has been sufficient, right? There is much work that remains, and that's kind of our big takeaway here. And it may be harder because it requires lifting many barriers at once. But I think it's worth emphasizing that that doesn't mean that it cannot be done. And I just wanted to end by, again, going back to Colombia, just kind of pointing out how remarkable it's really been, and then understand a little more. Just want to put some numbers on the table, right? In 20 years, women reversed the education gap. This is something we just saw. Steepest increases in female labor force participation in the region. Right? So in 1980, the labor force participation rate of Colombian females was the second lowest. By 2004, it was the second highest. The largest increases in labor force participation happened among women with children in the 0 to 6 age groups, which typically in countries has been the group that's hardest to shift. And there's been a very high representation of women in occupations such as managerial positions and the financial sector, which typically have been glass ceilings that they've just proven notoriously hard to break in many advanced economies. Right? So it's pretty clear that when these constraints can be lifted simultaneously, you can get a lot of progress. Right? And I think how to do that and where we go is something I'm happy to learn from in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists for 3 excellent and very provocative, stimulating presentations. In a moment, I'm going to ask each one of them to raise any questions they may have about the other 2 presentations, and then they're going to address the questions that you have sent them. But before I turn it over to them, I wanted to make some comments on what we have just heard. First of all, I think these presentations illustrate how important it is to look at the facts and to do that comparatively, because things with regards to gender equity in education aren't always as we might imagine. What we have seen is what a difference policy and leadership makes. The rate of progress in Oman, even though in relative terms, of course, one might argue that there is still a long way to go in Oman, is nothing short of remarkable. And the rate of change in Colombia, in terms of reversing these gaps, is equally admirable. Frankly, it puts the US experience in a bit of a stagnant context relative to the speed of change over the last 30 and 40 years in other countries. I think we have seen also how institutions and good programs matter. I was so struck to see in the case of Oman how the university is taking on responsibility not only to study these issues, but to engage in the development of engineering solutions to those issues in the schools. The last time I can remember that our universities in the United States seriously engaged in improving science education in our public schools was 50 years ago. In the case of Colombia, we see, and I can say this for Cecilia. Cecilia led an effort to get 6 countries in Latin America to participate in a cross-national study of civic knowledge and skills, in which most countries of the OCDE participated, most European countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which is now allowing public conversations about these issues. The United States Department of Education was invited 3 years ago to participate in this study, but the conclusion was that this topic was not really a priority for us. We don't do civic education in America today. And so I think these presentations illustrate that good leadership, good institutions, universities that are engaged can have tremendous impact in closing some of these gaps. But I want to ask something about the speed of change. How do we know that change is happening at sufficient speed? And I'd like to ask both Thuwayba and Cecilia to speak a bit about the political economy of change. Where does demand for change come from? What is it that keeps the pressure on governments? Because maybe there are some lessons that we can import in American society so that we too can see progress of comparable speed. Now, Jishnu's presentation is very interesting because it shows how these problems are complicated and they defy simple linear interventions, that really gender inequality is a function of a system that is interdependent, essentially of cultural norms, what employers do, and what institutions like schools do. But of course, to understand complexity doesn't necessarily equip us to act on that knowledge. It actually makes it more challenging because most governments and development institutions are very good at scaling up simple solutions. They are not so good at producing the kind of coordinated, interdependent interventions that I think your studies suggest would be necessary to really move the needle. And so my question is, so where do we go from here? It isn't always the case that understanding better equips us better to act on that knowledge. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our panel members, both to respond to these questions and to comment on each other's presentations.
I just wanted to find out from Mr. Das or Dr. Das how previous World Bank reports that had come to us had shown that we were making a lot of gains in terms of quantity, numbers of students who are getting in, but we were not doing so well in terms of quality. And the explanation from the World Bank report, the last one was 2008, said that we were spending a lot of money on education, but not on the things that actually matter in education. We are spending on infrastructure more than we're spending on the quality or what's actually going on in the classrooms and how much the students are learning. So what is there in the new report that can guide us into going towards the issue of quality and managing it better? No, for you. Well done.
I should pass that over to her. No, that's part of my own research is a lot on quality in education, and I think this has been the hardest area to improve. If you look, for instance, at the US, I mean, Fernando, you'll know this a lot better than I do. I mean, DC spends $17,000 per student, and recently we showed that their test scores are equivalent to rural Pakistani private schools, right? I think where the education discussion, and perhaps you'll chip in on this, has come to somewhat of a consensus is two things. One is teachers really matter. Embarrassingly, we don't know what it is about teachers that matter, but we know that there's some teachers who are really good and some teachers who are not that good. So some process about recruitment and hiring seems to be key. And the second thing I think that people are finding consistently is that resources matter when there is local accountability. But this is something that the report, at least this report, is not going to go into because, unfortunately, we are not viewing it as a difference between boys and girls at school. It seems to be a generic problem that affects both boys and girls very equally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going today, and I'm going to answer first. I think that in our case, the thing that is increasing the demand for education is poverty and inequality. I think the issue of inequality and poverty pushes us to solve or to enhance education. And the conflict is pushing us to, for example, developing all these citizenship program, because we think really that the only way to overcome the conflict and to make sustainable the peace processes are people that has different competences to interact with the other citizens. Then this is the main forces that are pushing us to enhance education and to civic education. And I have two questions. One for I cannot pronounce very well, Barwani, Barwani, Mrs. Barwani, because I wanted you to extend a little more about the point you are doing in choices and the kind of choices and the freedom of choice of women and not imposing some kind of behavior. I think that I would like to hear something more about that. And for me, Mr. Das, I wanted to ask you if we cannot change a little the market, because, for example, if women wants to be teachers, it's very good to be teachers, but the remuneration is not as good as being in engineering. And I think it's a choice to be teachers, and it's a very good choice. But you cannot move the salaries as you need. Well, I know that you cannot move the market, but I think that it's a tension that we have there, how to respect the choices. I don't think we have to push all the people to compete for salaries. I think that it's very good to have more salaries and better life conditions, and especially for poor people, it's very important to get better salaries to get out from the poverty. But I think that the choice is very important to take into account choices.
So, quickly on policies and choices, I think one of the things that we are trying to be very careful about is think about ways that we can we start thinking about policies in a way that engender choice but do not force choice, right? So just coming back to this point, I mean, there's this lovely work that's being done out of Oxford called the Young Life Study, where they've been following children for a while. And what they show, for instance, is that in India, at about age 7, girls and boys want to be roughly the same thing. And by the time they're 15, all the girls want to be teachers and all the boys want to be engineers, right? So to what extent that's actually a part of a system of education that is norming people towards certain educational choices, to what extent, similarly, we find, for instance, that when informal jobs or part-time jobs start becoming a better part of the system, women start shifting occupations, right? So part of the reason why they might want to be teachers is because it's the more flexible job, because it gives more time off. Similarly, we find that when childcare becomes available among Arab communities in Israel, the labor supply responses to go into labor supply are equal to what they are in Colombia, right? So maybe it could be that there are other things that are going on. So I think the hard bit, the moment we move into labor supply and occupational choices and how much women should work, is they are choices. And trying to figure out why and how policies can be provided that retain that freedom of choice but still may change things or may not is something that you guys have been much better at than the rest of the world. But I had just one question for you, which is something we're debating a lot, right? Which is, what's the role of legislation versus kind of economic incentives or labor market incentives in moving things along? And part of the discomfort comes from the fact that, as you were saying, that legislations often come about in low-income countries, but they need not be monitored well or implemented well. Mm-hmm. And I would love to get some feedback from you on kind of how important legislation has been in the Omani context versus just pure, built the schools, gave the things.
I think legislation has helped quite a bit, but not as much as having schools available, free education available in every village, every little town, even the remotest of places where schools were not economic to build, they would have busing available. And children would be bused to the nearest school, or one classroom, schoolroom, or whatever they call it, where you have boys and girls studying together in the same school at different levels in the same classroom, and that was made available. And so I would say availability of schooling is number one. Legislation helps in a lot of ways, but then you have to understand it and it has to be reinforced. Right now we don't have, for instance, compulsory education in Oman. We have access everywhere, and we are almost over 90% children are going to school. But then when I've been calling for compulsory education because it's important for us to have those kids who fail and drop out, we have to have them back in school. But the challenge that I'm getting all the time when I bring this up is that why do we need compulsory education? It's very costly to institute, the courts and to follow up families and to bring them in and all of that is very costly. We don't need that. Parents want to send their children to school anyway, so why do we need to spend that? But we still have children who are failing and who are getting out, who drop out, and we have children who actually don't go to school because parents cannot afford because I worked as an undersecretary for social development, and I've been to homes where parents do not have the money. They need to give 100 beza, I don't know, it's maybe a fraction of $1 a day for the child to go to school, so she can spend on drink and some food from the school canteen. And if the parents cannot afford, because they have a number of children that they have to give this money to every day, and they cannot afford, and they are on social welfare, so these children don't go to school. And the parents, because they are illiterate and they don't value education, they don't insist on the, so we do have aspects where the family does not encourage. But the majority would be that because of deprivation, you know, for a long period, as I said, Oman did not have any schools. So when schools started, it's a very encouraging scene of when you see a mother carrying the child's bag on her head and holding the child, a girl normally, on her right hand and walking her miles to the nearest school. She wants her daughter to be educated. She wants her to be better than her, and she wants her to have an opportunity which the mother didn't get. And I think that's really, really fascinating. Did that answer? Absolutely. Okay. So the drive, what drives?
So what drives you, and what drives the speed of change in Oman?
I think, as I said, the political will has been of tremendous support to us, and not only talking about opportunities for education to all women and men, of course, but also making it possible and spending the biggest budget in our national budget on education and health. And these are the two sectors that have done the most dramatic development in Oman.
Anything else you want to say in closing?
Can I answer some of the questions?
Please do.
Okay. I think somebody asked me if, what is the difference? What is the situation with women in Oman compared to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or Iran? I don't believe I'm in a position to compare, but I think in a lot of ways, with regards to the Gulf, I'll talk on the Gulf, Oman has been a trendsetter in terms of females driving. Oman has been the first country that has allowed women to drive, and since 1970, women have been on the road driving. Those who came from abroad, of course, they were driving where they were, and so they drove in Oman, and nobody stopped them. The same with women in parliament. Until now, Saudi Arabia does not have and does not dream to have one soon. Kuwait has been struggling with women in parliament. Oman has had women in parliament since 1994. In the cabinet, we had the first minister in the cabinet, and then other countries followed. So I think we can say proudly that we've been a trendsetter, and I believe the other countries are following suit, and they're working very hard. And I think overall, the Gulf countries have come a long way in the last few years. Another question was asking about the difference, whether sex of the child's teacher has made a difference or has an effect on secondary school performance of boys. I didn't have time to explain to you how the system works in Oman. At the grade 1 to 4, we have female teachers only. We don't have males. From grade 5, so we have only co-education schools where all girls and boys study together in the same school and taught by females. And then from grade 5, they separate into different schools. And in higher education, they come back again, and they study together. But in secondary, it's single-sex schools, so the male teachers are the ones who are the models. Now, if you remember my statistics, the males are not doing very well. And so I don't think the boys are getting good models, even though in Oman, we have, the College of Education has got almost the highest performance. We actually compete with the College of Medicine in terms of our intake. We have really the highest. So it's not a profession that is a secondary profession, or those who don't get anywhere get into. In our country, education is on high demand. And mostly because of the kind of flexibility it gives, the availability of schools near home, they leave early, and there are many other incentives that women get, and they prefer to be in a female-dominated environment where they can work freely. So I believe that would be the reason. Okay.
Cecilia, do you want to speak to any of the questions you have?
Yes, there is a question about children with disabilities. I think that it's very important to face the education of these kids. They can be employed and educated, and now we are trying to integrate these kids in the normal schools, and we are doing a lot integrating them. And I think that is obviously my focus is citizenship. I think that it's very important to kids for the kids that doesn't have disabilities. It's very important to have children with disabilities within the school. I think that to respect the difference and to see different ways of looking at the world is very important, and I think to integrate kids with disabilities is very important, even for quality of education. And then here there is another one that is, if we see men helping women with domestic needs, and I think that we have to see that. We have to encourage that. I think that is a long way, but we have to encourage from the school that kind of behaviors. I think that is very important, because if not, always is going to be more hours, more work hours for women. I guess it is improving a little, but I think that it's a woman's responsibility also to make them work.
Jishnu, you want to say any closing words?
There was one last question on outlier countries. So it is very clear that there are big regions of the world and countries and populations that are where women and girls face pretty severe disadvantage even at the primary level. So just to give you some examples, what also seems to be the case is that the problems in each of these, what we call the severely disadvantaged populations, are very different. So for example, if you look at the highlands of Laos and Cambodia, these are very scattered villages where there's very little market work going on. There's a severe problem with bad infrastructure. There's a severe problem with teachers not speaking the local dialect. If you look at Pakistan and Afghanistan, where primary enrollments are low, some people believe that it's because there's a preference towards not sending girls to school. We actually find that's not correct. What we find is that when the school is close to the house, there is no difference between girls and boys going to school. It's only when the schools get further away that this gap starts to develop. And this is both true for Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Jamaica, there's really an issue about masculine identities and crime and drugs, and which is pulling boys out of school. So my sense is, in some senses, with these severely disadvantaged populations, the policies and the strategies are going to be very country-specific. There's also one thing we didn't talk about, which is, there are also outlier, I wouldn't even call them outlier, severe areas where there are problems in schools, of schools were also supposed to be safe spaces. And I know, for example, that corporal punishment for both boys and girls is pretty severe in many countries around the world, and that we have a little bit of data from some countries on kind of abuse that girls face, both from their peers and from things. So I think, those areas are very much part and parcel of what we should be thinking about beyond enrollments and learning and occupations, and I think I'll just start there.
What's the last word?
I'd like to answer to one of the questions that was asked me about the implications of Sharia law for women. And I would like just to leave you with this answer. I think Sharia has to do with interpretation. And basically, you could interpret it moderately. or you could interpret it conservatively or in an extremist position. So you can find one Sharia for all of us, but then it depends on how you want to interpret it, and that's where we differ between countries. And you find, like in Saudi Arabia, when you steal, your hand gets cut. In Oman, when you steal, you go to prison. And so Sharia has been interpreted differently. We are all Muslim countries, and we believe in the same book. So.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our three panelists today. For a conversation that reminds us that while there is still much work to be done to achieve gender equity in education, there is good progress underway, and it is because of leaders such as those who have talked today that we have that progress. Thank you very much for your presence today. You did a great job. That was wonderful. It was terrific. It was very good.